Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So hello everyone and welcome to Dharma Bum Basics. My name is Travis. I facilitate this class. And so last week we finished up the fourth and final of a four-part series on the Four Noble Truths over the last few weeks. And today will be the first part of a at least 8-part, probably more, series on the Eightfold Path. Some facets of the path might require more than one class. So today or tonight we'll be discussing right view. It's the first of the Eightfold Path, and it's one of the discernment or the wisdom factors of the path, along with right intention or right resolve. So right view and right intention kind of form the discerning aspect of the path or the wisdom aspect of the path, that which informs the others, right? So tonight we'll be focusing on right view. Next week we'll do right resolve. A few things to mention. Down in the description box below, there's a few handouts. A couple one on right view, working with the Four Noble Truths, and then a couple on the Eightfold Path overall. And I also linked the Four Noble Truths playlist down below if you didn't get a chance to check that out. Could be helpful. Right view is very intimately connected with the Four Noble Truths. So, yeah. So for tonight, I think we'll go right on into the meditation. If anyone would like to say hi or share how they're doing, there's the live chat either over here or down there somewhere. Feel free to type that in and say hello. I'd love to hear from y'all. So, and then if at any point you have any questions about what I'm talking about, you can feel free to leave those there as well. I think we'll get right into the meditation, and then from there we'll go to the discussion. So a few things before we get started. Hey, Eric. So a few things before we get started and if this is your first time meditating, it's in terms of posture, it's helpful if you're seated in a chair to have your feet flat on the ground. If you're in a fairly comfortable chair, I'd suggest not fully utilizing the backrest as you're more likely to fall asleep. I like to bring the shoulders up and back and then relax down into a really sturdy posture. And then bringing the tongue gently up against the roof of the mouth and the back of the teeth prevents the buildups of saliva, which can become distracting. The most important thing with the meditation practice is to know that we're going to be sitting here, we're going to try to focus on present moment, on breath, on sensation, but the mind will wander. It's not a bad thing that the mind wanders. It's actually one of the benefits of meditation is that we're able to attempt at least to maintain this kind of stillness, this present moment awareness as a strong, sturdy, calm foundation to observe activity of the mind instead of our normal default, which is to get immediately swept up into any activity of the mind. And that activity of the mind can sometimes take us to beautiful places, but more than often takes us to unpleasant places. So having the mind wander during the meditation or having thoughts present during the meditation is actually something beneficial because we can begin to notice our default habitual tendencies towards certain kinds of thoughts and concepts and things like that. And we can begin to work on our reactivity, where we become less reactive and more responsive, more responsible, by being able to cultivate a healthy, slightly distanced relationship with things that come up, not having to identify with every single thought that occurs, because that'll make you quite miserable. So the mind won't stop thinking any more than the heart will stop beating or the lungs will stop breathing, hopefully. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Anytime that you've noticed the mind's wandered, it's actually a success. You can bring it right on back to the breath, back to sensation. I'll guide the meditation throughout, so no need to worry about that. Yeah. Hello, Jim. Hello, Beiruz. Hello, Marisa. Hello, Michelle. It's good to hear from y'all. So with that, we'll get started. Closing the eyes and taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And just noticing if deep breathing feels good. And if it does, you can keep on breathing in this way. If it doesn't, you can switch things up. Maybe even deeper still or more shallow. Heavier or lighter. In long and out short, or in short, out long. Just exploring for a bit to what kind of breathing feels best in this moment. This kind of experimentation with the breath is really valuable because it gives us some firsthand experience with playing with one of the ways that we fabricate our experience of the present moment. The way that we breathe has a huge impact on how we experience each moment. But if this seems too involved for you today, you can just pose the question in the mind as to what kind of breathing would feel best. And then just watch how the body responds. Once you've found a rhythm and texture of breath that does feel good, you can stay with it for a while. Breathing in, aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, aware of the out-breath. And as you're settling into the moment, it's helpful to make this moment a pleasant place to stay. Noticing if you're holding any tension in the forehead or around the eyes. See if you can relax it all the way through the in-breath and keep the tension relaxed all the way through the out-breath. Relaxing tension in the jaw as well, all the way through the in-breath and all the way through the out-breath. If you want, you can adopt a gentle smile as part of your posture. And while maintaining this breath awareness, you can also relax the shoulders and the chest. Noticing if there's any stress or tension building up as you breathe in and out. And seeing if you can consciously relax it with each breath. Softening the stomach as well with each breath. Just becoming increasingly sensitive to any stress or tension around the breathing process. Noticing where the tension is originating from and relaxing that cause. Breathing into it. You can begin to question what kind of perception you hold about the breath. How do you view the breath? Is it just air that comes in and out of the lungs? What would happen if you held the perception that the breath is what gives us life? This life force that flows through the body and nourishes the blood and animates the nerves. Notice if the experience of the breath changes depending on the perception that you hold of it. Breathing in, soothing tension throughout the body. Breathing out, settling into the moment. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. Gradually opening the eyes bit by bit with each breath. And taking the next few moments in silence to reflect back on this past session, recalling any particular sense of ease or well-being that you felt, and see if you can reflect back on what you were doing just prior to that arising. Where were you focused? What perception were you holding on to that gave rise to that sense of well-being? In this way, meditation can become a skill. Learning what works and what doesn't. And developing a set of tools to use in your respective practice. So as always, I'm curious to hear how that experience of meditation was for you. If you found it beneficial, if you didn't, or whatever you're sitting with afterwards. So as I do with any of these series that I do, the meditation is slightly different than when I'm just leading a normal class. When I lead a normal class, I start with what we did tonight for maybe the first 10 minutes of it, and then expand upon it, go through the body in more detail, things like that. But anytime something's titled Part 1, there's a pretty good chance that someone who it's their first time ever is going to click on it. So as we go through this 8-part series, the meditation will get slightly more I don't want to say complicated, but slightly more complex. Just really taking time with each facet of the style of meditation, of working up to this centered full body awareness, the soothing awareness. So, yeah. Janie shared, thinking of the breath as a life force put me in a sense of awe and wonderment. Awesome. It's really beneficial to notice what a strong impact holding certain perceptions can have on the meditation, because we pretty much come into every sit with a bunch of perceptions. We just don't necessarily notice what all the perceptions that we're holding are, right? So when we intentionally shift any perspective, any views that we're holding on to, it can completely shift the felt experience of the moment, both in meditation and outside of meditation. So it's really useful, it's really beneficial to play with perception in the meditation, because in the meditation, you can have more of a clear sense of the impact that shift in perception can have. And I talk about it a lot, that basically the three components of how we shape our experience of the moment is the way in which we're breathing, the sensations in our body, and the perceptions that we hold on to. Those three things kind of come together and create our view, our experience of whatever moment we're in. So in that meditation, we worked with sensations, we worked with the way that we breathe, and we worked with holding a certain perception in mind. And when you get all three together in the meditation, it can really transform the practice. So with that, I'll get right into right view. So as mentioned at the beginning, but in case you weren't here, right view or right understanding is the first of the Eightfold Path, and it's one of the discernment or wisdom factors of the path, along with right intention. So right view and right intention frame the rest of the Eightfold Path. They kind of give the worldview of the Eightfold Path. So in the most basic sense, right view is two qualities. One is a conviction in the principle of karma. In other words, the law of cause and effect, meaning that we have faith in the power of our own thoughts, words, and deeds to transform our mind, to transform our life. We have faith or conviction that if we behave in skillful ways, in kind and wholesome ways, we develop a more kind and wholesome mind and thereby life. If we behave in unskillful or unwholesome ways, we tend to make a mess of things. So that's the first thing, is a conviction in the principle of karma. And this doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to the Buddhist worldview of multiple past lives stretching back unto infinity that the Buddha is believed to have woken up to. It just means that you acknowledge that there's causes and effects in life, and that your actions can change your mind and your environment. And it's kind of a prelude to neuroplasticity. The Buddha 2,500 years ago saying that the brain is flexible, or the mind is flexible and malleable. And through consistency, through repetition, we can change its default modes to something that's less suffering inducing and more freedom inducing. So that's part of right view, is this conviction in karma. And then the second aspect of right view is a working understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So I'll do a bit of an overview of the Four Noble Truths, because the way I tend to lead these kind of series with the Four Noble Truths followed by the Eightfold Path is I don't do an overview of the Four Noble Truths. I do each Noble Truth by itself. And then when we get to right view, I do an overview of the Four Noble Truths, because Right view is this understanding of them. Right view is the framework of the practice. So a few things about these Four Noble Truths. One, the term noble is used to refer to them applying to everyone and applying to all time periods. It's not something that becomes dated or that doesn't apply to certain people. It's a universal principle or a noble principle. Because in life there is dukkha, dissatisfaction, stress, suffering, anxiety, which is the first noble truth. The second noble truth, the cause of suffering is craving. Craving to have something, craving to avoid something. And then the third noble truth, it's possible to be freed from suffering. It's possible to put an end to that very craving, to free the mind. And then the fourth noble truth is this eightfold path that we'll be covering here. The path of practice that leads to the end of suffering, the end of dukkha. So what is it? What is the application of these Four Noble Truths? Because again, right view being a working understanding of the Four Noble Truths doesn't mean that it's just a general understanding. It means there's something to do with these. There's an activity to perform in regards to these noble truths. So each noble truth has a specific duty associated with it. So these noble truths aren't just broad statements that the Buddha made 2,500 years ago about how the world works. They're kind of a framework for us to view our own experiences, a framework to use to free our own mind. So you have the noble truth of dukkha, or suffering, stress, dissatisfaction. Suffering is to be comprehended. It's to be looked into deeply and understood. And then the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, craving, is to be abandoned. It's to be let go of. So I'll stop there for a minute. This is kind of counterintuitive to our default way of dealing with these things, right? So our default mode is when there's suffering present, or dissatisfaction, angst, whatever you want to call dukkha. When it's present, we tend to try to avert our eyes away from it. And we try to focus on something else. We try to focus on some pursuit of sensory pleasure, or fantasizing about an ideal circumstance or our ideal version of our own life, or whatever it may be. And we try to get lost in like these fantasy worlds when we're confronted with suffering, or just do some kind of menial task that distracts us from it. And what we're doing there is the exact opposite of what these Four Noble Truths posit. What they state is, because what we're doing there is we're trying to abandon suffering, and then we're over here really developing the causes of suffering. So because it's this craving that's the cause of suffering. So when we're over here trying to distract ourselves from the suffering by indulging in all these things, what we end up doing is we've put the suffering into the shadows, and then we're churning out more suffering over here. So when suffering goes into the shadows, it grows without any supervision. So what we're kind of working with here is we want to really be able to develop a mind that can sit with our own suffering. That's why we do this practice of meditation, of allowing things to arise and pass away, and we maintain present moment awareness. We try not to get pulled into them. What we're doing here is we're trying to comprehend suffering. We're trying to comprehend dukkha. So instead of turning away from it, we look directly at it, and we try to soften into the experience of it. Because it says suffering is it says that suffering is to be comprehended, not to be immersed in or engulfed in. we're supposed to look at it. We're supposed to look at it from this place of stillness. So when we fully comprehend suffering, any particular suffering that we're dealing with, we begin to notice what the causes of that suffering are. And then once we've recognized the causes of suffering and our own role in creating the suffering, we can then abandon it. We can't just abandon the causes of suffering if we don't recognize them, we don't see them. But once we see these causes of suffering, we can abandon it. And when you abandon a cause, the effect, suffering, ceases or diminishes. So, yeah. And then the duties associated with the third and fourth noble truths. The end of suffering, or the absence of dukkha, is to be realized. And the path to the end of dukkha is to be developed. So when it's the end of suffering is to be realized, doesn't just mean ultimate freedom, nirvana, and all of that stuff. It also refers to everyday or moments throughout our everyday lives where maybe we're experiencing some kind of suffering, and then that suffering diminishes. It goes away. And it's important to maintain some level of awareness of our mind state throughout our day. And when we notice that suffering or dukkha has been diminished, this dissatisfactoriness has been diminished, we can reflect on what we were doing just prior to that led to that diminishing of suffering. And we begin to learn the causes to the end of suffering. And when we've acknowledged those causes, we can begin to develop them. We can begin to develop this eightfold path. So that's kind of the working understanding of these Four Noble Truths, is when we're experiencing something, we can ask ourselves, which category of these Four Noble Truths does this experience fall under? Am I experiencing suffering, or am I maintaining its causes? Am I experiencing an absence of dukkha? Or am I maintaining the causes for an absence of dukkha? And this kind of framework shifts from our normal framework of, I like this, I don't like this, that's mine, that's not mine. I like this, I don't like this, I want to associate with that, that's me, that over there is not me. And that's kind of the framework that we use throughout our lives. And it seems really reductionist, but it's pretty all-encompassing. And we shift from that framework of like and dislike and mine and not mine to one of cause and effect and skillful and unskillful. A skillful mindset means anything that helps to calm the mind, relax the mind, put it at ease, and an unskillful mind state, anything that inflames the mind. And that's kind of the format of these Four Noble Truths, right? You have an unskillful effect followed by its unskillful cause. And then you have a skillful effect followed by its skillful cause. And using this framework in the meditation and throughout our lives is deeply beneficial. So that's pretty much all I have to share for tonight on those. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer them. Big fan of answering questions. Eric was craving for the live stream to stop interrupting me. Said it's better. Hopefully it is. And that's one of the wonderful things with these live streams is we get to, and I've talked about this, I probably talked about it last week, but it's a really beautiful opportunity because we're sitting here talking about dukkha or dissatisfaction, that little aching feeling in the back of the head that something's just not quite right or everything could be a little bit better than it is. And that's, for me, that's never been more apparent than when framed within the context of the practice and framed within this live stream. Because you're watching this live stream, you're hearing about these things, about trying to subdue craving, trying to abandon craving, trying to develop these skillful qualities. And then you're confronted with this very, very tangible craving of, yes, I'm attending this Buddhist class, but it would be so much better if I could attend this Buddhist class at the temple. And then it would be so much better if I was attending this Buddhist class at the temple and all the people that I like to see were at the temple as well. And then it'd be so much better if I was attending this Buddhist class at the temple and all the people that I like to see were there as well. And also none of the people that I don't like to see were there. And it just keeps building, right? And that's kind of what we're struggling with when we're watching these classes, is we get very much confronted with craving, but within a context it's almost humorous in a sense, and not to make little of anyone who's really struggling right now. But to me, I like to find the humor in things, and there's a bit of comedy that I've noticed when, for example, Jeff often doesn't lead classes from here. And when I tune into Jeff's live stream, there's that wrestling match in the mind of, well, this is nice, but it'd be better if he was at the temple and I could be filming him, because then it feels more connected, it feels more involved, right? And it's this almost really humorous to me to watch my mind do this, because here I am listening to a talk about not getting caught up in stories, not getting caught up in expectations, while actively fueling an expectation of how it could be better if blah, blah, blah. So that's one of the amazing things with this time right now. There's a lot of bad things, and there's also a lot of opportunities for practice. So, yeah. Does anyone have any questions on these, on right view, or on any of the Four Noble Truths that I just covered? Eric shared, I was just craving being at the temple more tonight than any time since March. It's definitely challenging. Like, I'm here at the temple, but I'm used to having the circle set up around, and having people to engage in more of a conversation with. Because this class, the Dharma Bum Basics, maybe more than any of the other classes, was the way it was set up was very much an engaged dialogue of a sharing circle, more so than just a class. There wasn't as much of a Q&A and more of a sharing experiences, which is a lot harder to do in the context of this YouTube live stream. So for me, sitting up here, especially when there's the sections of quiet time, that was a very rare occurrence when there was people here, because there was usually decent discussion happening. So it's in those quiet moments that, while I do find a sense of ease and a sense of enjoyment in quiet moments, there's also that sense of longing for things to be the way that they should be, or that I perceive that they should be. So, yeah. Glad you found the summary helpful, Eric. So if there aren't any other questions, we can close up a few minutes early. Again, for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning, down in the description box below, there's a link to the playlist of the last mini-series that I did on the Four Noble Truths, as well as an overview of right view that I typed up. That's worth a read, hopefully. And then there's a kind of a brief overview of the full Eightfold Path, and then a more in-depth overview of what we'll be talking about for the next few weeks. The brief overview was kind of typed up as something for me when I first started leading classes, of being able to, it's able to be printed pretty small, and I put it up on my mirror, so I would memorize both the Eightfold Path and the facets of each factor of the path. So that can be kind of beneficial, I think. And then that is just the Eightfold Path listed out with the facets listed out without much explanation. But it's useful along with the more detailed type write-up about the Eightfold Path beneath it. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. If comfortable, please join palms for a transfer of merit. May all beings in all directions, without limit or end, be safe, healthy, joyful, and at ease. May we all be safe, healthy, joyful, and at ease. May any merit gained from tonight's discussion be dedicated to all those who suffer at this time. Metta karuna mudita peka sahanga teya cetasa chaturi sambharatva viharati sambhavalaro pavena sambhanamaru pavena sambhasangharo pavena sote hantu nirantaram. See y'all next week. Enjoy the rest of your night.